"You've got two choices," he said, his voice low but carrying an unmistakable authority. "You can leave quietly, or we can help you find your way out. Either way, this ends now." The bikers shuffled uncomfortably, their earlier confidence unraveling. One of them muttered something under his breath, but the leader's sharp glare silenced him. It was clear these weren't men to be trifled with. But just as it seemed the bikers were on the verge of retreat, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance. The lead biker's eyes darted toward the street, his jaw tightening. "You called the cops too?" He spat, his bravado cracking. Mike didn't answer right away. He looked at the man calmly, his expression unreadable. "I called someone," he said, his voice steady. The sirens grew louder, and moments later, a police cruiser turned the corner, followed by another. The officers stepped out, their hands resting on their belts as they assessed the scene. One of them recognized Mike and gave a small nod, clearly aware of who he was and the respect he commanded. But then something unexpected happened. As the officers approached, the youngest of the bikers, barely more than a teenager, suddenly stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "Wait," he blurted, his voice shaking. The group turned to him, confused and irritated. "What are you doing?" The lead biker hissed, his face twisted in anger. The young man hesitated, his eyes darting between Mike, the veterans, and the officers. "I didn't sign up for this," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't know we were messing with people like him. The tension shifted as the bikers realized one of their own was breaking rank. The police, now on edge, moved closer, ready for anything. The veterans stayed still, their presence like a wall that refused to budge. Mike's eyes softened just slightly as he looked at the young man. "You've got a choice," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that silenced everyone. "Decide who you want to be, right here, right now." The young biker's hands trembled, his face pale as the weight of the situation settled on him. And just as it seemed the conflict might de-escalate, the lead biker clenched his fists, his face dark with anger. "Nobody's backing down," he roared, revving his engine and shattering the fragile moment of calm. The stakes had just skyrocketed, and now everyone braced for what was coming next. The roar of the lead biker's engine shattered the silence, the defiance in his stance daring anyone to make a move. For a brief, electric moment, it felt as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. Mike didn't flinch. Neither did the veterans standing beside him. The officers, now fully alert, exchanged cautious glances, their hands inching toward their radios. But then, just as the tension reached its breaking point, Mike stepped forward again. His calm presence seemed to cut through the chaos, grounding everyone in the moment. He didn't raise his voice or make any sudden moves. Instead, he fixed his gaze squarely on the lead biker. "Enough," he said, his tone carrying the kind of authority that could stop a storm. The lead biker hesitated, his bravado flickering. His hand hovered over the throttle, unsure whether to push forward or retreat. The younger biker, still standing to the side, looked torn, his eyes darting between his leader and Mike. And then the unexpected happened. A small voice broke through the tension, a child's voice. "Mommy, why are they so loud?" Everyone turned. A little boy stood in the doorway of one of the nearby houses, clutching a toy truck. His mother appeared behind him, pulling him back gently but unable to hide the fear in her eyes. The sight of the child seemed to shift something in the atmosphere. The younger biker's face fell, guilt flashing across his features. Even the lead biker faltered, his grip on the handlebars loosening for the first time. Mike seized the moment. "This isn't about you or me," he said, his voice steady. "It's about them." He gestured toward the houses, the families watching from their windows. "You came here to prove something, but look around. What are you proving? Scaring kids? Tearing up someone's lawn? That's not strength, it's weakness." For a long moment, no one spoke. The lead biker's jaw tightened, but he didn't rev his engine again. The younger biker took another step back, clearly shaken. One by one, The group's confidence unraveled, their unity crumbling under the weight of Mike's words. Finally, the leader gave a sharp nod. "Let's go," he growled, his voice low and defeated. Without another word, he turned his bike around, and the others followed, their engines fading into the distance as they left the neighborhood behind. From the corner of his eye, Mike noticed Mrs. Jenkins, the elderly woman across the street, peeking out from her window. Her hands trembled as she pulled the curtain aside. She'd lived in the neighborhood for decades and had never seen anything like this. Mike felt a flicker of anger, not at her, but at the fact that these strangers had invaded her sense of safety. One of the younger bikers, a wiry guy with a tattoo snaking up his arm, revved his engine and spun his back tire, tearing up the edge of Mike's lawn. "What's the matter, Grandpa? Cat got your tongue," he taunted, his voice cocky. Still, Mike said nothing. Instead, he reached into his back pocket and pulled out something small. The group stiffened, but it wasn't a weapon, it was a phone. Mike didn't break eye contact as he started dialing. "What, you calling the cops?" The lead biker sneered, but there was a flicker of hesitation in his voice now. Something about Mike's confidence unsettled them. He wasn't panicked, wasn't afraid, and that was the kind of thing that could throw even the boldest troublemaker off balance. The bikers weren't sure what was coming next, but the look in Mike's eyes said one thing loud and clear: they'd just made a big mistake. The street grew eerily silent, save for the low growl of the bikes and the faint sound of Mike's voice as he spoke into the phone. The bikers exchanged uncertain glances, their bravado flickering. They weren't used to being ignored, especially by someone they thought would cower or lash out. But Mike's calmness wasn't weakness. It was calculated. "Yeah," Mike said into the phone, his voice steady and deliberate. "I need a little help with something. Come quick." He didn't raise his voice or elaborate, but the way he spoke carried weight. When he hung up and slid the phone back into his pocket, he didn't look at the bikers. Instead, his eyes swept over the neighborhood, a subtle reassurance to the watching faces behind the curtains. The lead biker, now visibly irritated, barked, "You think we're scared of a phone call? We own the road, old man. Nobody's coming to save you." His voice was loud, but there was a nervous edge creeping in. Mike finally broke his silence, his tone even and firm. "I don't need saving, but you might if you don't leave while you still can." The younger biker snorted, but the confidence in his laugh was fading. The group had come here looking for an easy target, a way to flex their power. They hadn't expected resistance, let alone someone so composed. And now there was a growing unease they couldn't shake. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last. The rumble of distant engines began to echo down the street. At first, the bikers dismissed it, but as the sound grew louder, they couldn't ignore it. The lead biker turned his head, frowning. From around the corner came another set of motorcycles, sleek, disciplined, and moving with purpose. These weren't just random riders. They wore patches on their jackets that immediately caught the attention of the Rowdy group. Mike's calm expression didn't change, but there was a faint flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. The tension hit its peak as the new group pulled up, parking in perfect formation on the edge of the street. One of the riders dismounted, his boots hitting the pavement with purpose. He removed his helmet, revealing a sharp, no-nonsense expression. He glanced at Mike, then at the bikers. "You called Mike?" he asked, his voice steady but carrying an undeniable authority. Mike gave a slight nod, his gaze fixed on the group that had been so bold just moments ago. "Yeah," he said simply. "I figured you'd want to meet some new friends." The bikers, now outnumbered and clearly outmatched, shuffled uncomfortably. The street was on edge, every moment charged with anticipation. Whatever was about to happen next, no one could look away. The air crackled with tension as the new riders stood shoulder to shoulder, their presence radiating quiet strength. The lead biker's smirk faltered as he took in the patches on their jackets, realizing these weren't just any riders. They were part of a well-known veteran motorcycle group. Their reputation was enough to make even the boldest think twice. For a moment, the street was silent, the only sound the faint rumble of engines still cooling. The man who'd spoken to Mike, clearly the leader of the group, stepped forward. His piercing gaze swept over the bikers, sizing them up with the kind of precision that only came from years of experience. The veterans didn't move until the last bike disappeared. Then, the leader of Mike's group clapped him on the shoulder with a small grin. "You've still got it," he said. Mike let out a breath, his calm exterior finally softening. He glanced around the neighborhood, where faces were slowly reappearing in windows and doorways. The mother with the little boy gave him a grateful nod. Just as everyone started to relax, the sound of a single engine came roaring back. Heads whipped around in alarm, but it wasn't what anyone expected. The younger biker, the one who had broken ranks, pulled up slowly and cut his engine. He removed his helmet, his expression uncertain but determined. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely audible. "I didn't want it to go this far." Mike studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Takes guts to admit that," he said. "Now, what are you going to do about it?" The young man hesitated, but then he stepped off his bike and extended a hand. "Teach me," he said simply. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Mike shook his hand, offering the young man a second chance. It wasn't just the resolution of a conflict, it was the start of something new. A lesson in what real strength looks like. The street slowly returned to its usual quiet, the tension dissipating like a storm that had finally passed. Neighbors began stepping out of their homes, some offering hesitant waves or murmured thanks to Mike and the veterans who stood alongside him. The little boy from earlier smiled shyly, tugging at his mother's hand as she gave Mike a heartfelt nod of gratitude before heading back inside. The younger biker lingered, his helmet tucked under one arm and his gaze fixed on the ground. He looked unsure, as though he wasn't sure where he fit in now that his group was gone. Mike, ever calm and deliberate, placed a reassuring hand on the young man's shoulder. "The first step is always the hardest," Mike said, his voice steady. "But you've already taken it. Keep going." The young man nodded, his expression a mix of relief and determination. He shook hands with a few of the veterans before climbing back onto his bike and riding away, not in anger, but with purpose. His departure didn't feel like an ending, it felt like a new beginning. As the veterans began to disperse, the leader of the group turned to Mike with a small smile. "You've got a knack for turning trouble into lessons," he said. Mike chuckled, shaking his head. "Just trying to keep the peace," he replied, glancing around at the now settling neighborhood. The street fell quiet once again, the hum of daily life slowly resuming. Mike returned to his porch, his coffee now cold, but his mind at ease. He watched as kids began playing outside again, their laughter filling the air like nothing had ever happened. For Mike, it wasn't about winning or proving a point. It was about protecting what mattered most. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood, he leaned back in his chair, satisfied. Peace had returned, and for now, that was enough. It was a quiet afternoon at a small-town gas station, the kind of place where people stop to refuel and grab a coffee before hitting the road again. The sun was beating down, and everything seemed calm, until a group of bikers rolled into the lot. With their loud engines and cocky attitudes, they commanded attention, their laughter echoing as they strutted around like they owned the place. Standing by one of the pumps was a man who didn't quite fit into the scene, a soldier, still in his fatigues, filling up his old truck. He had a calm demeanor, a quiet presence that didn't draw much attention at first, but the bikers, they noticed him. Maybe it was the uniform, maybe it was his relaxed confidence that rubbed them the wrong way. Whatever it was, they decided he'd make an easy target for some fun. One of the bikers, the leader of the group, walked up to him with a smirk. "Hey, soldier boy," he sneered, loud enough for everyone around to hear. The others chuckled, circling closer. The soldier glanced at them, his expression unreadable, like he was sizing them up, but not giving anything away. What happened next was unexpected. Instead of reacting with anger or fear, the soldier simply smiled, calm, almost unlovingly calm. the kind of calm that made the air around him feel heavy. The bikers didn't realize it yet, but they were about to learn a hard lesson about messing with the wrong person. As the tension rose and more people started watching, one thing was clear: this wasn't going to be an ordinary confrontation. Stay tuned to see how this soldier handles the unexpected showdown in a way that leaves everyone stunned. The soldier's calm expression didn't falter as the bikers continued to close in, their jeers growing louder. One of them revved his bike's engine, a sound that seemed to cut through the still afternoon air like a warning shot. The leader leaned in closer, clearly trying to intimidate. "What's the matter, soldier boy? Cat got your tongue." The soldier, still filling his tank, didn't rush or even look rattled. Instead, he glanced over his shoulder, giving the group a once-over, as if silently assessing the situation. He wasn't a big guy, lean, average height, but there was something about the way he carried himself. It wasn't arrogance or bravado, it was quiet confidence. A kind of energy that made the crowd of onlookers wonder if these bikers had made a mistake. From inside the gas station, the clerk watched nervously, his hand hovering over the phone. A small crowd was beginning to form, drivers pretending to check their cars, but really just watching to see what would happen next. The bikers, oblivious to the growing audience, continued their taunts, growing bolder. One of them even stepped closer, knocking the soldier's gas cap to the ground with a smirk. "Oops," he said mockingly, "guess I'm clumsy." For a moment, it seemed like the soldier might let it slide. He calmly finished filling his tank, replaced the nozzle, and picked up the gas cap, dusting it off. But the tension in the air was undeniable. It wasn't just the bikers who could feel it. Everyone watching felt it too, like a storm about to break. Finally, the soldier straightened up, turned to face the leader, and locked eyes with him. "You sure you want to do this?" he said, his voice calm but firm, his gaze unwavering. The leader laughed, but it wasn't as confident as before. Something about that question seemed to throw him off. What could this soldier possibly have up his sleeve? The leader of the bikers squared his shoulders, trying to hold onto his bravado, but there was an undeniable shift in the energy around them. The soldier's question, so simple, yet so deliberate, seemed to hang in the air, heavier than any insult the bikers had thrown. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed the leader's face, but he quickly masked it with a cocky grin. "Do what, soldier boy?" "We're just having a little fun," the leader shot back, though his voice carried less confidence than before. The others chuckled, backing him up, but their laughter felt forced. They could sense something was off about this man, but their pride wouldn't let them back down. Meanwhile, a man fueling his SUV a few pumps away whispered to his wife, "I think this guy's military. Look at how he's standing, feet planted, hands relaxed. That's training." She nodded, her eyes glued to the scene like everyone else's. Inside the gas station, the clerk finally decided to pick up the phone, dialing the local sheriff's office just in case. He'd seen enough fights at this station to know when something was about to go sideways, and he didn't want to clean up another mess.